They sent a helicopter to film his home being raided live on television, but 4 years later, the BBC was forced to pay millions for the biggest mistake in media history. This is the moment a single judge changed the rules of privacy forever. Imagine waking up, pouring your morning coffee, and turning on the news only to see your own apartment building plastered across national television, surrounded by police vehicles, with a news chopper circling overhead. You haven't been arrested. You haven't been charged with a crime. You haven't even been questioned. Yet, to millions of viewers watching the live broadcast, your guilt has already been decided by the sheer spectacle of the media circus. This was the exact nightmare faced by one of the most famous musicians in British history, and it sparked a legal war that would completely redefine the boundaries between freedom of the press and the right to privacy. To understand how this catastrophic media failure happened, we have to look at the climate of the British media and the justice system in the year 2014. At this time, the United Kingdom was reeling from a series of massive historical abuse scandals involving high-profile celebrities, most notably the devastating revelations surrounding Jimmy Savile. The police were under immense, unprecedented public pressure to prove they were no longer turning a blind eye to the elite. They launched widespread operations, such as Operation Yewtree, which actively encouraged anyone with historical allegations to come forward. This created an environment of intense paranoia and an aggressive hunt for the next big scoop. In this hypercharged atmosphere, a BBC reporter named Dan Johnson received a tip from a highly placed source regarding an allegation made against Sir Cliff Richard. Cliff Richard was essentially British royalty, a pop icon whose career spanned over 5 decades, known for his clean-cut image and immense charitable work. The allegation dated back to a Billy Graham rally in the 1980s. The police force involved, South Yorkshire Police, were already dealing with severe reputational damage from other scandals, and they were desperate to show they were taking this new accusation seriously. The BBC reporter approached the police with his information, effectively cornering them into a controversial deal. If the police confirmed the tip and gave the BBC exclusive access to the upcoming search of Cliff Richard's property, the BBC would hold off on running a premature story that could potentially derail the investigation. It was a Faustian bargain, a symbiotic relationship between law enforcement and a massive broadcaster, built entirely on the premise of publicizing a man's misery before a single shred of evidence had been properly examined. The execution of this deal resulted in one of the most heavily criticized broadcasts in the history of the BBC. On August 14, 2014, South Yorkshire Police executed a search warrant on Cliff Richard's penthouse apartment in Sunningdale, Berkshire. The BBC was tipped off precisely when and where the raid would happen. They didn't just send a reporter with a camera to stand on the sidewalk. They chartered a helicopter. They flew it directly over the private residential complex, beaming live, high-definition footage of police officers walking through the singer's home, rummaging through his personal belongings into the living rooms of millions of people. The visual language was unmistakable. In the eyes of the public, the use of a helicopter signifies a major, dangerous criminal event. It triggers a psychological response in the viewer that the person being raided must be a high-level threat. The BBC practically weaponized this psychological trigger. The broadcast was triumphant in its tone. Inside the BBC newsrooms, there were literal celebrations. Editors sent congratulatory emails praising the exclusive access, patting themselves on the back for beating their rival networks to the punch. The sheer hubris was staggering. They even submitted their coverage for the prestigious Scoop of the Year at a major journalism awards ceremony, completely blind to the ethical catastrophe they had just engineered. They believed they were acting in the ultimate public interest, exposing a powerful figure, but they forgot one crucial detail. Cliff Richard had not been arrested. He had not been charged, and as it would turn out, he never would be. What followed the helicopter broadcast was a 22-month living hell for the accused. For almost 2 years, the singer lived under a dark, suffocating cloud of suspicion. The emotional and physical toll was devastating. He described feeling as though he was going to die from the stress, losing weight, unable to sleep, and watching his lifelong reputation be dragged through the mud on a daily basis. The fundamental injustice here was the legal purgatory he was placed in. In the UK justice system, like many others, you are presumed innocent until proven guilty. But the media operates in the court of public opinion, where an allegation coupled with live helicopter footage is an immediate conviction. During these 22 months, the police continually extended his bail without ever bringing formal charges, because the evidence simply wasn't there to support a prosecution. Finally, in June 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service officially announced that there was insufficient evidence to proceed, and the case was completely dropped. Cliff Richard was entirely cleared, but an apology wasn't enough to rebuild a shattered life. He decided to fight back. He launched a massive lawsuit against both the South Yorkshire Police and the British Broadcasting Corporation, suing them for a catastrophic breach of his privacy. The ensuing courtroom battle was a classic David versus Goliath scenario, though in this case, David was a millionaire pop star and Goliath was the state-funded media behemoth. The BBC mounted a fierce defense. Their lawyers argued passionately that the broadcast was entirely justified under the banner of freedom of expression and the public's right to know. They claimed that naming suspects in historical abuse cases encourages other potential victims to come forward, a tactic often cited by police. They framed their actions not as an invasion of privacy, but as vital public interest journalism. However, the presiding judge, Mr. Justice Mann, systematically dismantled the BBC's defense in a monumental ruling. The judge scrutinized the internal communications of the BBC, exposing the self-congratulatory emails and the Scoop of the Year nomination, which painted a picture of a news organization driven by sensationalism and ratings rather than careful, ethical journalism. The judge pointed out that the BBC had practically strong-armed the police into cooperating, threatening to publish the story prematurely if they didn't get their exclusive helicopter footage. The judge ruled that suspects who are under police investigation but have not yet been charged have a reasonable expectation of privacy. This was the pivot that changed everything. The judge determined that the BBC had violently breached that privacy without any overwhelming public interest justification for the sheer scale and sensationalism of their coverage. The financial consequences for the BBC were astronomical, climbing to a total hit of roughly £2 million. This staggering figure wasn't just handed over in a single briefcase of cash for damages. The actual damages awarded directly to Cliff Richard were £210,000, a figure meant to compensate for the emotional distress and damage to his life. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. The BBC was ordered to pay a colossal portion of the singer's legal fees, alongside their own spiraling legal costs from mounting such an aggressive, prolonged defense. Furthermore, the South Yorkshire Police had already settled their portion of the liability out of court, paying £400,000 plus costs, leaving the BBC to absorb the brunt of the trial's financial fallout. The £2 million price tag was the ultimate cost of institutional arrogance. The ripple effects of this verdict extended far beyond the walls of the courtroom, creating actionable, technical precedents that altered the fundamental mechanics of British journalism. Before this ruling, the boundaries regarding when a suspect could be named were blurry at best. Media outlets routinely identified individuals who were merely under investigation, exploiting a grey area between arrest and formal charge. Mr. Justice Mann's ruling effectively codified a new standard based on Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the right to respect for private and family life, and weighed it against Article 10, freedom of expression. The technical takeaway was profound. An allegation of a crime is inherently stigmatizing. Even if a suspect is later cleared, the mud sticks. Therefore, the simple fact that police are investigating someone is intensely private information. Journalists can no longer justify splashing a name across the front pages merely because an investigation exists. They now have to prove an exceptional public interest, a bar that is incredibly difficult to clear simply for the sake of an exclusive story. This ruling has had massive real-world applications that protect everyday citizens, not just wealthy celebrities. Imagine a bitter neighbor making a false, malicious accusation against you. Prior to this precedent, a local newspaper could catch wind of the police visiting your home and publish a sensational front-page story destroying your reputation in the community, even if the police quickly dropped the case the next day. Today, because of the fight that took place over that helicopter broadcast, the media is legally restrained from publishing your name until formal charges are brought. The legal landscape was forever altered, a fact reinforced years later in another landmark case, Bloomberg versus ZXC, where the UK Supreme Court fully cemented the principle that a person under criminal investigation has, prior to being charged, a reasonable expectation of privacy. The media industry screamed that this would create a chilling effect on investigative journalism, arguing that they would no longer be able to expose corrupt officials or powerful predators. Yet the courts drew a hard line in the sand, determining that the destruction of an innocent person's life for the sake of a news scoop was a price too high for society to pay. The ultimate irony of this entire saga is that the BBC's relentless pursuit of a journalism award ended up generating the single biggest legal restriction on British journalism in modern history. Their desperate attempt to capture a sensational spectacle with a helicopter resulted in a spectacular multi-million-pound crash landing that fortified privacy rights for an entire nation. It is a stark reminder that in the rush to judge, the media can easily become the monster they claim to be hunting. The power to broadcast is the power to destroy, and when that power goes unchecked, the financial and moral costs are devastating. If you found this breakdown of media overreach fascinating, you need to see what happened when a single blog post pushed a professional wrestler to sue a media empire into absolute bankruptcy. Click the video on your screen right now to discover how Hulk Hogan completely destroyed Gawker Media, and I will see you over there.